They're schemers. Schemers trying to control their little worlds. I'm not a schemer. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other. And here we go.
Well, hello there. How is everyone? You amazing, beautiful, wonderful people. I hope you are all well on this Wednesday. That's it. It's Wednesday. You know what that means? It's the midweek hump, baby. And we all love a midweek hump. You're looking absolutely amazing. Have I already said that? I don't know. But if I have, I've now said it twice. You're looking doubly amazing. And in this video, what am I doing? I'm going to be sharing a bed with Bryan Entin. That's right. Midweek hump as well. Midweek hump and in bed with Bryan Entin. Can't get better than that, can it? Big fat man and a midget in bed together. There'll be videos of that all over the internet soon. There we go. Why am I in bed with Bryan Entin? I don't actually mean I'm in bed, because that can mean lots of things. Not only could it mean like that sort of thing, it could also mean that when you're in bed with someone that you agree with them. And if someone was to say, do you agree with Bryan Entin? Fuck no, I don't agree with Bryan Entin at all. I do not agree with Bryan Entin at all. And why? Because Bryan Entin is making a transition, it seems, from mainstream media to social media. And all he's basically me now. He's basically a really small version of me, but he's basically me. And what I mean by that is, again, he's making the transition from someone who reports for mainstream media, and then he sets up his own channel. I've never reported for mainstream media, but he has set up his own channel, Bryan Entin. Bryan Entin Investigates. And then he's talking about crimes, but he's obviously talking and pulling up questions about Bryan Kohberger while simultaneously ignoring any red flag about anything else about the case whatsoever. And I wonder why. I wonder why that is. And is it simply because he is the narrative king and he has decided that he is his forte is Bryan Kohberger hating? Who knows? But look, let's get into bed with Bryan Entin. At least with him in the bed, there's still plenty of room. I don't know whether that is a massive bed or that is a single. But look, he's going to talk about, and the funny thing is, he recently spoke about Bill Thompson not going back to him when he requested to have an interview, and then he wonders why. I'll tell you why, Bryan, because you have been involved in the propagation of shit for the last 2.5 years. Yes, not all of that has been shit. You have reported on some other stuff, so look, I'm trying to be fair, but a lot of what you've spoken about has been bollocks, and it would appear that you're now talking even more bollocks, because the person who you kind of moaned about that he wouldn't allow you to interview him, he came out and said that Bryan Kohberger, no indication of stalking, nothing whatsoever. Now, subsequently, he did then do the CBS interview where he turns around and completely contradicts what he'd said earlier and basically said, well, we do think that he was probably stalking the area. And then obviously that's what Bryan Entin has done. He's latched onto that like a humping dog, and he's now humping the shit out of it. So let's watch Bryan Entin hump the shit out of the stalker narrative yet again. My point being sort of to raise is this is what we're now seeing. We're now seeing somebody who was basically just turning into me, where I will look at things that are spoken by people that raises red flags and issues and then report on them. The difference is I will report on both sides of the fence, whereas Bryan Entin will seemingly happily ignore red flags when it's a little bit more controversial. So he's safe. He's playing it safe. Let's listen. And don't forget, I do have to periodically stop it and offer commentary over the top, or I will get struck down with furious anger. I need to go back into bed. Sorry, I just had to get out for a piss. There we go.
Found that have to do with whether or not Kaylee Gonzalez had a stalker, and whether or not Bryan Kohberger was actually lurking around the house at 1122 King Road before the murders. Now, keep in mind, prosecutors have said very clearly that they don't have any evidence that Kohberger was stalking the victims or that even really knew the victims before. But
well, there you go then. That's that then. That's it. The actual prosecutors, the people who was involved in the investigation, they have no evidence whatsoever to suggest that Bryan Kohberger was stalking the victims. So there we go. So anything else beyond that is complete and utter speculation, questioning things. See, is it possible? Is it possible? I'll explain in a second why that's important, because would it be right to question this situation and say, well, there's no investigative situation that would suggest Bryan Kohberger was stalking. There's no evidence or anything. And you could say that with respect of the 8-hour phone delay in calling in the aftermath of this crime, and seemingly a story that keeps changing, and it would appear that the story that law enforcement had was very different to the story that potentially got leaked to media and then allowed to sort of propagate in the public eye. That then changes. We go from sort of frozen shock phase to no one's frozen, or at least their hands have thawed out so they can use their phones, and then their legs subsequently thaw out because they can move around the house, and their eyes aren't sort of frozen because they see their roommate laying in the doorway of the room. But we won't question that. Don't question that or anything about that, because if you do, that's victim blaming. But in this situation, no investigative issues, nothing that would suggest that Bryan Kohberger was stalking them prior to the crime itself. Nothing whatsoever. And you've got the main prosecutor, the lead prosecutor, coming out and making contradictory statements depending on who he's talking to. When he's talking to one person, he's saying, well, Bryan Kohberger might have looked at Ted Bundy and that, but that's what his sort of studies would dictate that he would have to do. And then in another interview, it would be, well, he was looking at these sort of people. In one, he's saying, well, we've got no indication of stalking. There's no evidence to suggest he was stalking. There's absolutely no connection. And then in another interview, he turns around and says, well, we believe that he was probably stalking these people. Complete fucking conjecture, which when you think this is the lead prosecutor, that is fucking weird. But let's just see where Bryan Entin goes with this. Let's see if he sticks on, well...
Early on when I started covering the story, there had been reports from family and friends of Kaylee's that she was nervous about being stalked and that she thought that she may have been being stalked. And even I was thinking back after reading these reports, the first time that I went to the Gonzalez's house in Coeur d'Alene, they live in Coeur d'Alene, so it's a bit of a drive outside Moscow. And the first time I went there, which was well before Bryan Kohberger was arrested, this was pretty soon after the murders.
This is where he interviews them, and they speak on the stalking situation.
I remember her parents and her sister telling me that they thought that Kaylee had told them that she was worried about a stalker that early on. So it was interesting reading these reports. I'm going to read them to you now. These are from friends of Kaylee's. This is from one of the roommates, and also this is from Kaylee's ex-boyfriend, Jack. I'm going to start though. This is from one of the roommates here. And this is, again, these are police reports that...
We're not going to listen to all of these, by the way. We'll listen to this first one, and then we want to look at how or why that could be important if you want to go down this route, and why it's interesting that he is still latched on to Bryan Kohberger, but ignores the bigger issue here. If indeed they're trying to say now that Kaylee Gonzalez is potentially the target and she was being stalked, because that raises even more questions.
And interviews that police were doing in the immediate days and weeks after the murders. So it kind of takes us back to that time. This is November 13th, 2022. This is when the names are blacked out, so I can't be positive, but sort of piecing the information together. This is interviewing one of the surviving roommates. And I'm just going to say blank because a lot of these are blank and still blacked out. But it says, blank talked about an incident with Kaylee, who stated about a month ago that she saw an unknown male up above their house to the south who was staring at her when she took Murphy out to go potty. Blank stated Kaylee broke up with her longtime boyfriend about 3 months ago because she was planning on moving to Texas. Blank could not provide me with anything else at this time, but stated about a month ago she saw an unknown male up above their house to the south who was staring at her when she took Murphy out to go potty. Now, let me describe.
So, like I say, I don't need to go into that so much because this is what they're trying to say. They're trying to say, obviously, Kaylee Gonsalves, and they're focusing specifically on Kaylee having a stalker. So she goes out of the house and she's walking around with Murphy, and then there's someone up on the hill behind the house looking at, and while Kaylee's out there. Now, first of all, that doesn't mean that Kaylee Gonsalves has got a stalker at all, because that would mean that whoever was outside the house, bearing in mind that there's multiple people in this, that Kaylee Gonsalves isn't the only person who lives in this house. This is a house that is occupied by multiple individuals, and multiple individuals go to this house. It just happens that Kaylee Gonsalves happened to walk out of the house and walk the dog while the person is out there. So that could be completely coincidental. There's nothing to indicate that this person who was up there was stalking anyone. And even if this person is a nefarious individual and they are stalking the house, there is nothing to prove that Kaylee Gonsalves is the person who is being targeted here. But let's just go down this route then and say, okay, Bryan Entin, you're correct that Kaylee Gonsalves, she was obviously being stalked. She'd got a bit of a, she felt that she was being stalked. It had been raised as a potential worry. Kaylee Gonsalves didn't live at the house. She didn't live at 1122 King Road anymore. She had left 1122 King Road. She was living somewhere else. And it was only a last minute thing. She was told to come in, I would imagine, by the very person who you are now saying had raised this complaint about there potentially being a stalker, which I'm guessing. But if you've got that person who calls that person over kind of out of the blue and says, look, I want you to be my plus one, and that same person is saying, well, look, she had a stalker. She had a stalker, mate. Again, do you see where I'm going with this? And again, this is all speculation, but that's what he's doing. So if he can do it, surely I can do it. I'm just trying to ascertain why somebody would feel that this was Kaylee Gonsalves who was being stalked and was potentially the target here, and she'd been being watched for a long time, when we ignore the fact that she had left the building. She no longer lived here. So if someone was stalking her, then they would know that she no longer lived there. And unless they had insider knowledge, then how would they know that on this particular night that she would be back there? Even her vehicle was different. The vehicle out the front, that wouldn't have been an indication that this was Kaylee Gonsalves because it was new. So again, unless this person was stalking her to the point where they knew that she'd purchased another vehicle and was heading back in, then I don't really fully understand. Because again, if this person is absolutely Kaylee Gonsalves is the target, then how would they have known that she had gone back there on this night? It answers some questions as to why did this particular crime happen on this particular night that potentially was a risky night to do it. Football night, loads of cars out the front there, lights on, food deliveries around the time that this person is apparently here. So it's almost like you feel that their hand was forced. That, you know, you tell me, let me know down below. You know, was Kaylee Gonsalves the intended target here? But does that raise any other questions, especially when we've also got a DoorDash driver outside claiming that they see someone up in the window who is looking and ducking down, and it seems that they are looking out for something. Now, I'm not trying to push any narrative here. I'm just saying that this is what we're being told through information that is being made public. And it looks a bit odd, doesn't it? It looks a little bit odd. It looks like you've got a lookout in the house. If he's trying to push that Kaylee Gonsalves had a stalker, you've got Kaylee Gonsalves who moves out, and then somebody from inside the house calls Kaylee Gonsalves back to the house, and then on this particular night, this crime happens, and Kaylee Gonsalves does seem to get the brunt, the you've seen the reports, you've heard of the injuries, and then you've got in the aftermath the individual, very likely, possibly the individual that called her to the house, pushing this she was being stalked narrative. I don't know how I feel about it, because I still would consider that if Kaylee had moved away and she had a stalker, then that stalker would know that she moved away, and at that point they would not really know anything anymore. It would just be like she has left the area. She's gone, unless someone was feeding them information that, no, don't worry, she's coming back, and she's coming back on this particular night. But look, Bryan Entin, new YouTube, Bryan Entin channel. Head over to Bryan Entin channel if you're interested in only looking at one side of the story. And yeah, there you go. This is Bryan Entin, the narrative king. Bryan Kohberger was likely stalking Kaylee Gonsalves for months prior to these crimes. I wonder if he'll touch on the fact that it would seem that this area, or Washington, already had someone who was willing to go into people's rooms with balaclavas and knives. That's it. There's a new report out saying that Bryan Kohberger was investigated for a crime that actually happened a year prior to this, where a balaclava-clad individual went into a room with a knife. They got kicked in the belly and ran off. No one was ever found. Not Bryan Kohberger, apparently. Red flags, anyone? Love you all. Mwah.